So for test one, okay, so because the schedule is not out, but tentatively is either in week 7 or week 8. So currently we are in week 6. So the topics that will be included for your test one would be chapter 1, which is introduction to management. So if you can still recall introduction to management too, we have two parts. Okay, so the part 1 is basically on general management. The second part is about talking about the theory of management, scientific theory, and so on. So the history of the theoretical part of the theoretical part of the management. Okay, so so chapter 1, introduction to management. Chapter 2, history of project management. Okay, so chapter 2 would be on when project management has arise. Basically, we talk that it arise a lot during um, during war. Okay, so 1950s and so on. And then we talk about project. Okay, so what is a project? And also project priority matrix. Okay, so trade-off, those are very important lah. Okay, so chapter 2. Chapter 3 was project management in Malaysia. Okay, so PMI, Project Management Institute. Okay, so and then general challenges in construction. So that will be project management in Malaysia. And chapter 4. Okay, so the chapter that we're going to touch today and tomorrow. So basically, in total, your test 1 will include chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and the topic that we are going to touch on chapter 4, which is project definition. So project definition is a very short topic lah basically. So the chapter tak panjang. And the questions will be in objective. Okay. All right. So that will be on the test. So not sure whether it will be in week 7 or week. Prepared lah. So that's okay. So semua nampak project definition? Okay, all right. So for today, okay, so we'll try to touch on a project definition. It's a short topic. Basically, project definition is the first stage of proper project management. So basically, when we are saying that, okay, I'm conducting or I'm utilizing project management. So the first stage would be project definition, where we define the project. What do we want out of the project? So basically, you are giving meaning to the project lah. Okay, so project definition. So for project definition, basically the outcome will be project charter. Okay, so you'll be able to understand or discuss the importance of defining the project correctly, determine the question that must be answered to properly define a project, and review the essential elements for a project charter. Okay, when we talk about project definition, please bear in mind that project definition happens at the client's organization. It is not on the contractor. So project definition ni, this project charter ni, okay, so you can more or less say it is something like kertas kerja. Okay, so working paper for that project. So project definition is the very, very front end of a project whereby it usually takes place at the client's organization. Okay. Kenapa? Dengar ke?
Dengar.
Okay. So, which means project definition is carried out by the client. It can be government, it can be private. Okay, cuma it is at the front end yang mana you will try to see actually what do we want. So you need to engage the stakeholder, you need to engage the client. What do they want in the project that you are trying to come up with? So in order to come up with this project charter, there are elements that you need to input dalam project charter tu. And the person who actually comes out and derive this project charter, kejap, ada tutup Okay, so the person who actually comes about producing this project charter will be project manager. Okay, so project manager that works for the client company, bukan contractor. Okay, so project charter will be produced by the project manager who works in a developer's company. So, as a project manager, sebenarnya you can work in a contracting company. So, contracting ialah you will be the main contractor. You are in charge of the delivering the task kepada workers. Workers conduct the work on the site. But if you are a project manager for developers company, you are managing. You are the project manager, tapi you are not tasked to bagi arahan kepada the workers, because the workers are under main contractor. But if you are a project manager under developer, so you like macam mandor lah lebih kurang, because you need your progress comes from the main contractor. So normally you will work closely with the main contractor. So the other difference, project manager, but which organization that you are representing. Okay, so if you're representing main contractor, your task is to make sure physically the building are being built on the site. You're going to make sure your workers, you're going to make sure that your engineers are following your order on the site, the workers are doing it. But if you're a project manager at the developer's office, your task is more to ensuring that your main contractor is following your task yang besar tu. Okay, so there are difference. So if you ask which job is ataupun which role of a project manager is easier ke? It's not that heavy lah, basically. It's not site based yang you will need to dictate the workers, then you'll be developer, because you are more like a mandor. So because you are the client, so you're representing the client. Okay, all right. Okay, so project definition. Okay, so what does it mean? Okay, so defining a project is a process where you select and reduce the ideas. So you can imagine that when you are at the front end of a project, you might have several options. Okay, whether the client wants to build luxurious bungalow ke on a piece of land, or whether with that piece of land you want to build semi-D ke, or whether on the piece of land you think you want to build terrace houses. So it can be several options. So dia tak adalah one option and that is the only one. Normally you have several options and then you will do the reduction. Okay, so based on the risk, based on the market survey, based on stakeholders, the other stakeholders, what they think of it, based on funding. So you would have, and then you will reduce it to the point that, okay, that this is the final one and it is agreed upon by the stakeholder. Okay, so this is where you have like jumble up of several ideas, but finally, you need to get the agreement from the client, stakeholder that, okay, this is the way to go, and you will move forward with the next processes, getting in architect, engineers, and then moving on with the quotation and then contract, baru your main contractor comes into the picture. Okay, so this is a very front end. You might get architects involved if you think they might give you better idea, or it could be just at the client's organization, okay, to do this. Okay, and perspective of those involved, okay, so into a set of clearly defined objective, key success criteria, and risk. Okay, so this is where that you will look into the ideas, reduce it, make sure that you can create a defined objective. So the objective of this project is to construct how many units of a semi-D, for example. Okay, and then what could be the success criteria? What would stakeholders associate the project to be successful? Okay, so whether is it time, cost, quality ke? Are there additional requirements set by the client themselves? Maybe is in terms of safety ke? Okay, so success criteria and the risk, evaluated risk. Okay, so there are some risks that you might undertake. There might some risks that you might want to you can undertake. Okay, so you need to eliminate. So this definition process, okay, finally, once you go through the whole thing, you would see that supposedly at the end of the day, you should be able to come up with one document. They call it project charter. So the formal word for this document is called project charter, but maybe some companies might not call it project charter, but I believe any project, any small, even small project, you would have a document where it has been preliminary agreed upon, and this is the direction to move forward. So maybe people might call it kertas kerja, working paper, so proposal. So might be a different name, but for project management, we call it project charter lah. Okay. Okay, so these are several items that you need to input in the project charter. Okay, so you need to have more or less these things addressed in the project charter. So, for example, these are the questions that you might ask the client. Okay, so if you are assigned as the project manager and you were to come up with the project charter, so these are the questions that you might ask the client. Okay, so project charter, whatever written here, the input is by the client. And you need to understand clearly what the client wants and input it properly. Because whatever written need to be agreed by the stakeholder, and that will be the way forward for the project. Okay, so the first one is what are the aims of the project? Okay, so you need to ask the potential client. Okay, so what they want from the project. Okay, and what do they see this project would how to say would add value to their organization. Okay, so and at the same time, you will also need to work as a check and balance as well. Okay, because you might be having client with minimal experience in construction, tapi nak buat some construction, but zero idea. So, as a project manager representing them, you need to be also proactive to understand that, okay, this client wants something like this, but has never done such project before. What could be the potential risk and so on? How could those projects be impactful or add value to the organization? Okay, so you need to get that first. Okay, so next is what benefits does the client expect from the project? Okay, so you need to highlight the benefits of the project. So obviously it needs to come from the client. Okay, so you need to dig deeper on the aim, why they have it in the first place, and how that project will be beneficial. Okay, so whether in the short term, whether in the long term period, so it depends on the aim of the project. Okay. All right. So the next is what factors could influence the project. Okay. So what could be the contextual factors that could influence the project? So there are quite a lot of things that could influence a project. Okay. So for example, these are some of the lists. Okay, so at the front end itself, you need to understand whether there are any legislative requirements that you need to follow. Okay, so legislative, certain acts have been put in place in constructing certain facilities. Okay, so you need to understand the requirements that is being done, regulatory as well. Okay, so and especially when we are coming up with a certain project in a certain locality, for example, certain local council, you need to know what are the regulatory requirements set by the council themselves. Okay, so the understanding of the project in a certain context too, you need to know, because probably there are some councils who actually are looking forward with green. Okay, so maybe they're looking into sustaining green city at that point. Tapi you are proposing something which is totally against the green. Okay, so maybe you are coming up with certain commercial area but without any input of green facility, so it's kind of does not go along with the requirements set by the client council lah. So before anything, if you have that thought in mind about a certain project, you need to understand what are the requirements. Okay, and then if you are talking about project which are brownfield, okay, so which would probably emit certain gas. Okay, so certain gas, because it's factory area probably, so you need to emit certain gas. So those need to fulfill any pollution requirements that has been set. Okay, environmental act that is being set. So this is very important. So if you don't check and kena saman, then it is purely is on the fault of the client lah. So if you're considering certain project which might require or might abide certain legislation, regulation, you need to check. Okay. Um, Other than that, you need to also see if there are any previous failed attempts at the project. Okay, especially abandoned project. So there are quite a lot of abandoned projects in Malaysia. Okay, so whether it's residential project or commercial project, you nampak project tu separuh je siap. Okay, so and then just abandon like that. So for you to actually take over a certain project that has been abandoned, you need to understand why it was abandoned in the first place. Was it because of the cost, or was it because of any factors, locality factors? Okay, so it can be because the ground condition is that bad that the previous client did not want to proceed. So you need to know. Okay, so previous failed attempts of a certain project, and especially when the project is left abandoned, structure dah naik, maybe architecture left. So you need to check on the structural integrity as well of the project. Okay. Other than that, you need to check the organizational drivers for the project. Okay, so internal, external support, opposition. This is especially very important if you're talking about taking over someone else's land. Okay, so it could be quite a piece of work juga if you're talking about your project, something which is horizontal in nature lah. Okay, road ke highway, or MRT, for example, LRT. So those that you will need to cross someone's land, then it will be quite a task at the front end. Okay, and it can take a long time. Okay, so to to get the land and so on lah. Ataupun if you can't, then you need to go through a different route and so on. So that needs to be known lah. Okay. Public opinion. Okay, so in Malaysia we do get public opinion, but for mega projects. Okay, so and also EIA. Okay, so environmental impact assessment report also being done for sensitive projects as well. Okay, so environmentally sensitive project. And also physical environment of the certain project and locality. Okay, so at the front end is a lot of thought should be given on the general factors. Okay, so external factors that might give impact to the project. Okay, so not about workers or what, but you will need to think about workers if your project is related to any specialized expertise. Okay, so then you might also need to think of that. Sebab that is considered later, you'll be look upon it as risk as well. Potentially a hindrance to the progress of a project. Okay. All right. Next, what are the deliverables of the project? Okay, so when will we know the project is complete? Okay, so this is For construction, I think shouldn't be a problem because we will have a contract document later. But at the front end, it needs to be agreed upon by all the stakeholders and also the client. When all this comes into the date, okay, in the date form, when should they expect the concept plan to be completed? When is expected for the detailed design, especially when you're expected for tendering. So those dates should be agreed upon. And once agreed, then dia tak adalah turning back. So we move forward planning the next phases of the project using the date that we have actually agreed upon here. Okay, so timeline. Okay, next, how will we know if the project is a success? So this is pretty straightforward. Okay, so we need to get input from the client. How do they measure success? In construction as well is pretty straightforward. Okay, so success for construction, you should complete the project within the time frame, within the budget, as required in the contract document. So the specification and also the drawing. So more or less normally for construction, if we can complete within these three elements that we have decided earlier, then it will be success. Tapi nowadays, we are also looking into accidents. Okay, so a project can be super fast completion, finish in time. Tapi if let's say client has actually set one of the success criteria to be zero accident, tapi that one you tak achieve. Okay, so that one your project has actually come across several accidents, mungkin dah ada fatality, then it might not be success lah. Okay, so this one has to be agreed upon by the client and also all stakeholders. What do we understand about success? Okay, so but for construction, pretty straightforward and everything is in the contract. Cuma this one, the example is given based on IT. Okay, so based on website. So sometimes it's quite difficult for us to judge a website, for example. Okay, so it might be vague. So some people's design of a website could be eye pleaser for someone, and it could be so for another person. So something which is subjective, it is quite difficult when we are trying to put it in the form of success. Okay, so a painting, for example, a design of a certain how to say, a certain something abstract lah. Okay, but for house and so on, if that has been agreed by the client, this is how it is, then it is agreed upon. So the contractor just needs to build. So benda tu dah not considered anything vague lah. Okay, so it has been agreed. But for something like a look and so on, benda yang subjective, then it's quite difficult for us to say. How do we say is successful? Okay, so how do we measure the thing is pretty or not pretty? So okay, so but for construction, I don't think we have a problem because it is all in the contract document. Okay, so next, define the funding resources. This is important. Okay, so what resources are available for the project? So the client needs to be very transparent on this as well. Okay, so when we're trying to allocate a certain funding cost for a project, the resources needs to be made known. Okay, so the current capital that your client has, and it needs to be transparent so that it is within the means of the client. Okay, so you will need to know what funding and what people, technology, materials are available for the project. So you need to know where your money will be coming from. So the client needs to mention that as well. Okay, so next ialah define the guiding principles for the project. Okay, so are there any underlying principles that the project manager needs to be aware of? Okay, guiding principle is about principle of an organization. Okay, so for example, you might come across a client who actually probably does not want to involve um, overseas contractor. Okay, so there might be organization that only involve local contractors. So these are the principles set by the client, and you need to abide and highlight that in the document as well. So okay, so those are guiding principle. Or there are some organizations who actually are advocating sustainability. So those are the guiding principles. So when you're designing, when you are moving forward with the project, you need to understand that this organization are looking into addressing the SDG goals, for example. So those need to be highlighted and it need to be input so that it is well understood by everyone. So later, when the designer comes in, when the contractor comes in, they know that the principle by the client is okay, sustainability. Ataupun the principle by the client is ensuring zero accident or health and safety is the priority. So this should be highlighted in the document. So just so that the stakeholders agree about it, and moving forward, things could be planned based on the principles. Okay, so quite many organizations would have their own principles to ensure that their operation is, for example, if they are going for SDG, so their operations are clean. Okay, and they are looking into the social well-being of the people, the social well-being of the workers as well, and so on. Okay, so the principle. Okay. Okay, so those are some of the questions you may ask the client. Okay, so your job as a project manager, if you are given the task of coming up with a project charter, is to ensure that those things are brainstormed. Okay, so those things, it's not like you sit down interviewing the client. Dia bukanlah sitting down, okay, what do you need, what do you need. So it should be because you will be working for the client's organization. So a meeting should be held, brainstorming sessions. So those are to assist you to come up with the document. Okay. So, and the name of the document, finally, for project definition, will be project charter. Okay, so project charter is basically project definition document. So this is the official name. Cuma sometimes they might call it working paper dan sebagainya. But the term that you need to know, you need to use when we're talking about the initial document that comes into picture when we're talking about project management at the project definition ialah project charter. Okay, so it's the first document that exists in the project. Okay, so without this charter, it's like you cannot affirm the project. You cannot confirm that okay, this is what we want, and the next activities could come. Tak boleh. You need something that tie everyone, authorize, and you are given authority because you as the project manager, you come up with the document and you will be authorized to be the project manager for this project. And with that authorization, you can move and do other things. So we can't plan forever. So you plan and then you define it and then you move on with the next activities. Okay. All right. So the project charter names the project, briefly describes it. Okay. So whatever that you have attained from the client, you need to put it there. It will be written by the project manager, okay, but must be issued under the signature of someone above the project manager who has the authority to make project assignment. Okay, so maybe by the director of the company or maybe the owner of the company and so on. Okay, so in general, okay, so these are some of the items that you can include in a project charter. Okay, there might be brief project charter, there might be more detailed project charter. I'll just show you an example later. Okay, but anyhow, more or less, these are the things you must have in a project charter. Okay, so usually at the cover of the project charter, you might have a project authorization. Okay, is a statement to say that the project is authorized with the name of the project and also if there are numbers. Okay, so if you're talking about certain type of project, obviously in an organization you have many numerous projects. So usually we have like project ID lah. Okay, project name, project ID lebih kurang. Next, you will have project manager authorization. Okay, so you will have one column or one area that you need to name the project manager. If you are coming out with a document, then your name as a project manager and your responsibility. So because this will be the kickstart of the project, so there are roles that you need to play to ensure that the project could move on, move forward successfully lah. Okay. Okay, in the project charter, you need to also include the key stakeholders. Okay, so who would be influenced? Okay, so your key stakeholders can be positively or negatively influencing the success or failure of a project. So those key stakeholders must be identified. Normally, the key stakeholders of an organization lah. Okay, so you need to clarify their function, their role, okay, to avoid confusion. Okay, next you need to have your project goal. Okay, so you need to have a statement of basically this project were to construct 24 units of single story bungalow and so on. Okay, so your goal needs to be specific. Okay, so what type are we talking about? It needs to be measurable. Okay, so how long do we need to produce? Okay, is it a 1 year project, 2 year project? And obviously, the costing as well. How much are we allocating for the certain project? And it needs to be achievable. So if we are putting a certain number to it, 1 year, 2 year, possible to complete or not possible? Okay, so achievable. So obviously in a certain project, when we are listing that goal, we need to make sure that it is achievable. Okay, and relevant to the corporate strategy. Relevant in a sense that when we are determining on the goal, it needs to add value to the organization. There's no point that an organization not move forward, okay, in 20 years time listed in the stock, okay, tapi your project it is not building up to that, so no point lah. But obviously when an organization comes with a certain project, obviously there would be adding value to the strategy, okay, and also timeline. Okay, so with a certain time. Okay, so another thing that you might want to input in your project charter is what the priority of the client. If you can still recall project priority metrics, you can place it here. Okay, so you can, because project priority metrics, the priority is set by the client. So this is where you can actually input your priority metrics. So that shows that whether the client is prioritizing time ke, cost ke, scope and so on. Okay, so this should be highlighted. So dia tak perlu Gantt or whatever, just the priority metric to show that, okay, for this project, the client is focusing or prioritizing the time factor so that everyone knows. Okay. And the priority should remain constant throughout the project. Okay, so the priority should remain constant. If you have the client this month prioritizing time, next month rasa-rasa okay prioritizing scope, cost, then it will be super havoc and your project, I'm not sure whether it could be completed or not. Okay, so that's why very important when this document is to ensure that the client does not have the changes. They're very difficult when your client is fickle-minded. And then changes happen. It frustrates people who is working on the project, and it causes a lot of this kind of delays lah. Okay, because we are talking about construction, we are talking about so many parties, and changes really create a chaos, especially by the client. So benda tu sangat penting. Okay, so priority matrix is important. Once a certain here, that will be the direction the project goes. And that is how the Gantt chart or the schedule later will be produced. Okay. Okay, scope statement. Okay, so describes the major activities. Okay, so that is clear enough that if extra work is added later on. Okay, so basically it's just the scope of your work. It can be in the form of a simple work breakdown structure pun boleh. Okay, so just to show that, okay, our work involving constructing the unit, how many unit or whatsoever, until landscaping, for example. So landscaping of the residential. So it could be in the form of task kerja, activities and such. Macam tu. Okay. So, but it's not detailed. At this point, you can imagine dia bukan dalam bentuk detailed Gantt chart or whatsoever. It's just general activities that will be involved. Okay, next product requirement. Okay, so okay, this one it depends. Okay, so in our case, normally we will conduct a market survey to understand the requirement by the buyers. Okay, if let's say the developer tak buat market survey pun, at least they would need to know, they would need to conduct a desk study to understand the nature of the area for a certain project. If you're coming up with, for example, luxurious unit of bungalow, you need to know the area is where people would want to go, especially people with money. So the selection of houses that we want to build sometimes is very important. Sometimes you can see that project condo, I think 300, 400,000. Tapi kawasan yang mungkin that area it is not, the society there, the community there is not well to do. Who is going to afford that? And if someone from outside, would they want to actually move into such area? So sebenarnya when you're coming up with a project, you need to understand who will be the potential buyer and will there be any shift and so on. So that's why very important. Market survey is one, but understanding the economics of the certain locality, understanding the movement. If you are opening jauh, for example, like kawasan Rawang those days. So when people started opening, so the thoughts would be like, ada ke orang nak duduk Rawang that far? So, but over time you can see the highways are coming up and so on, then it feels near. So it's quite crucial, especially you're coming up with project yang very, how to say, very, I mean, you are doing it earlier than the others. Okay, so you are looking into something that someone else are not doing yet. So you might want to be the first person coming up with such project, but you need to be sure that you have the people is going to consume that lah. Okay, so product requirement. So what is being required? And also you need to understand the houses nowadays, what is required. So you can see that a lot of residential houses are gateless. Okay, so because they have the security at the front end of the garden and so on. So there are gateless. Is that what people want? Or is that what people don't want? So those are the things. So simple things macam tu. Okay, and also landscaping. Because obviously landscaping comes with a huge sum of money juga. So especially if the area comes with full green trees and so on. So do people require that? Maybe some yes, some do, but how big of the buyers who want to invest in such area? So sometimes landscaping, the houses could cost millions. Okay, but itulah, those are the things lah. Okay, so the requirements, product requirements. Okay, next ialah project assumption. Okay, so any assumption that related to the project. Okay, so maybe assuming on if it's a BIM project, building information modeling project, do we have the expertise involved? Are we able to actually come up with a BIM model with the current resources? So you need to have that kind of assumption. Okay, so not everything to assume, but something that you think that would affect, that would risk the project. Kalau let's say if it's not evident there. Okay, so availability of specific resources. Like I mentioned, if it's a building information modeling project, do you have the um, team to actually manage the model? Okay, so it's not everyone can do kind of skill. So those skills are required, would be need to be acquired. Okay, so information, funding, how are you going to gather funding, and also personal skill. Okay. Okay, so next, you need to highlight the constraint, the boundaries. Okay, so what are the potential challenges? Okay, so this one would be the answer from the regulation just now. Okay, so any legislation requirement, any regulation requirement, any constraints that has been set by the local authority. That's very important. Sometimes when we want to do something, the project especially, it is not only you if you have the money. So it goes back whether it is allowed in a certain piece of land. For example, agricultural land, and you want to turn it into commercial land. It might require certain changes, but whether it's acceptable or not, so those are the things. Okay, so there are constraints, land attainment, regulation in that certain council, and any certain act that is being involved. So those needs to be highlighted. Okay, so it could include budget limit. Okay, so any constraint challenges in terms of budget, any time constraint, okay, so regulation or any standard you must meet. Okay, so these are some of the elements that might pose as like a constraint. Okay, so you need to highlight this one benda yang perlu ditepati. Okay, so we need to address that. There is no compromise on that. Okay, so this needs to be highlighted. Okay, and then next ialah initial project risk. So why we call it initial? Because we are at the front end. So there are some things that we might observe once is ongoing. But at the front end, you might see we might have a risk in terms of maybe polluting that area, for example. Okay, if your project is something that comes up with factories, okay, that is going to release gas and so on. So those are some of the risks. Or if your project is highly technologically advanced, the skills, the equipment, the software, so that might be risky as well. Okay, so do we have the certain what do you call assistant, certain expert on that? Okay, so any identifiable obstacles, risks that might prevent successful attainment of a project goal must be considered. Okay, so risk must be analyzed, quantified, prioritized. If you can eliminate it, you eliminate it. But if you can't and you want to absorb the risk, then you need to control je. Okay, so your risk can be, it can be so many type of risks. Okay, it can be funding risk, something that gives risk to your funding. Okay, so pinjaman tak lulus ke, or it might be some funding from a certain stakeholder that you think 50-50. You might get, you might not get. Okay, safety and health risk, material shortage risk. It can be so many, but at this point of time, initial project risk is probably you are talking about where the potential effect to the project. Okay, funding, potential risk that might give way to funding of a project. Um, Environmental. Okay, so potential risk in terms of the locality. Okay, so these are some of the risks that you might want to look into. So at this point, you need to identify the risk and you'll see whether the risk, sama ada the risk will be severe ke, or whether the risk will be negligible. So this is where you will need to look into risk management lah. Okay. And then you will list down the deliverables. Okay, so your project charter would involve the list of deliverables. So what would be produced at the end of the day? Okay, and it can be intermediate, it can be end deliverables. End deliverables are finally the house. Okay, if you're coming up with a project of building something, the end deliverable is the house. But intermediate is something in between. Okay, so it can be the job of landscaping, for example. So the job of certain activities. Okay, but usually we don't put it in the intermediate in list of deliverers. So usually you place the list of deliverers as something at the end of the project. Okay, so what do we deliver to the client at the end of the project? Okay, and then cost estimation. Okay, so this will be a brief cost estimation. So it won't be detailed cost estimation kat sini. It won't be the whole bill of quantity. Tak ada, bukan macam tu. So it's just a brief estimation to understand that, okay, this is the budget all stakeholders agree upon. Itu je. Okay, you might have certain activities or certain estimation as such. Okay, so design lah and contractor, and then more or less general materials. Maybe if you want to go detail on it, tapi not the BQ tu. Okay, so just cost estimates. Schedule estimate as well. Okay, so we are not talking about Gantt chart yang a few pages to, not that type of Gantt chart. General estimation of time. Okay, so you might want to break it down to major milestone. Okay, so procurement, design, detail design, and so on. You might want to put in that, okay, bila schedule. So you won't go in detail of beam to beam concreting, column to column concreting. So not that detail. So in general, schedule estimates, and very importantly, when is the deadline? Okay, and integrated change control, you might add in your project charter. Okay, so basically, how do we deal when there are changes in the project charter? What is the process we need to go through? Because if we don't do that, who can say no to the changes and who authorize the changes? So very important, because we don't want the client just switch on and off as wish. So dia perlu ada proper, if there are changes, who could authorize it and what are the processes involved? Okay, so integrated change control. Okay, next ialah success criteria. Okay, so we need to identify what are the success criteria. So this one I mentioned, normally we'll talk about the time, we'll talk about the budget, we'll talk about the scope. Okay, so if the contractor could complete within the time, within the budget, and as required by the scope, consider successful lah. Cuma if there are additional highlights by the client, such as accident, pollution. So if that is being added by the client and being required, you have to address that. So that will ensure that project completely successful. Okay, so those are some of the elements, okay, that you need to know to be incorporated in a project charter. Okay, so what to do if you have no project charter? I believe a project cannot go through a proper smooth sailing process if there is no project charter, or you call it working paper and so on, because you need that to move on, something like that. Okay, so if you're as a project manager, you have not written project charter, if there are projects initiated, then you need to do that. Okay, so that it is in proper agreeable document and it provides authority that the project could be conducted. Okay, so project charter should be written, signed by the appropriate stakeholders. Okay, so these are some of the summary, okay, of the project charter. So you can go through on your own. Okay, finish on that. Let me just share how a simple project charter looks like and how sekejap eh. Okay. Can you see my slide here on a simple project charter?
Yes, madam.
All right. So how a simple project charter would look like? Simple lah. Okay, so you can have a project charter as simple as this. Okay, you have the project name, you have the sponsor, you have the project manager. If you are the project manager for the project, then you can place your name. And then the project objective. Okay, so to improve residential experience in regards to academic mission of the university. Okay, so timeline. The context of the project. Okay, so generally the background of the organization or about the project in general. Okay, program issues. Okay, sometimes we might need to highlight also if we want a certain project, what is the underlying issue? Maybe there are limitations to residential in such area. Population dah membesar, growing, but there are lack of houses in such area. So then you might want to highlight the issue that, okay, this project has been developed in order for us to address the shortage of low cost or medium cost houses in such area. Okay, so the context. And then the goal. Okay, so and then you have major deliverables. Okay, so task list. Okay, so can be in schedule, but is in this one is in terms of task list. Scope of the activities, scope of the work. So this one they have divided into phase 1, what needs to be built and so on. So scope kerja. And then the role of the stakeholders. Okay, so these are some of the role of the stakeholders. Okay, so a simple project charter might look as simple as this. Okay, so you can come up with it based on what your project charter is about. A slightly detailed project charter, which I think is still simple, but adalah a little bit tambahan. Okay, so you have the project title, project manager, client, working title, project sponsor, okay, and prepared by the project manager. Okay, so you will have the project overview. You would identify the stakeholders. Okay, so the background of the organization, background of the project, why do we need the project? Okay, so the scope of the project. Okay, so you can see that there might be a little bit lengthier and here is more simplified. Okay, but so long it could address what has been given by the client. Okay, so that is important. Project objective. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. Okay, and then sponsorship by whom, references. So it depends. Some might come up with the work breakdown structure here, some might not. Okay, so even if they have the work breakdown structure, it will be in a simple manner. Dia bukannya beam to beam kind of work breakdown structure. Okay, project approved section. So based on life cycle, project deliverables. Okay, so the organization involved, okay, so who might be the potential stakeholders? Project responsibilities. Okay, so risk management. So just now the simpler one did not have risk management. Okay, so but this one at least they have certain regulations or certain SOP that they follow in order to manage risk. Okay, process option. Stages. Okay, so project life cycle lah ni, stages, initiation and so on. Okay, so project control. Okay, so control in the sense that who is accountable by to whom. Okay, so order should come from whom and so on. Okay, project communication route. Okay, project schedule. So a simple work breakdown structure. Okay, so this will be the approval section. Okay, so approved by the stakeholders of this project charter. Okay, and reference. Okay, so you can see that more or less the main components remain the same. So mungkin you have add on here and there a little bit extension to the common, but you need to understand that the most important elements are basically these elements. Okay, so this you must have in a project charter. Cuma you can tambah tolak here and there lah. Okay, all right. So far, any question?